Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Following the death of Joseph Smith, it was W. Phelps who actually spoke at the funeral of Joseph Smith. He was also very instrumental in choosing a successor during the secession crisis. We're going to learn more about this and his move west to become the first editor of the Deseret News with Dr. Bruce Van Orden. He's the biographer of W. Phelps and has the book We'll Sing and We'll Shout, The Life and Times of W. Phelps. So if you don't have this book, you better get it right away because it's an awesome book. So check out our conversation.
Let's just finish up. So Joseph Smith died in 1844. The Saints moved west. Phelps moved west, right?
Let me say, though, that in the immediate aftermath of the martyrdom, the apostles were in the east. They didn't even hear of Joseph Smith's death until a few days after it occurred. The only two apostles left in Nauvoo to lead the church were Willard Richards and John Taylor, but John Taylor was nearly killed and ineffective for 5 or 6 weeks. And Phelps had been in on all the councils leading up to the time when Joseph Smith was killed.
Was he kind of a 13th apostle?
In many ways, yes, he was. Not officially, though. I don't want to ever give that impression.
Right.
But he was in on all the councils, including the Council of 50, and the Nauvoo City things, which was a church-state operation, no question. Anyway, when in the immediate aftermath of the martyrdom, the two men who kept peace and kept the church in harmony, more or less, for 5 weeks until the apostles arrived back were Willard Richards and his good friend W. Phelps and collaborator. And those two pretty much took care of things for 5 weeks until the apostles began coming back. And someone had to give the funeral sermon for Joseph and Hyrum, and it was W. Phelps who gave the funeral sermon in which he articulated the teachings of Joseph Smith about the kingdom of God on the earth, including the political part of it. And people have wondered, why did Phelps give the funeral sermon? It's because he was one of the leaders of the church and one of the two who really was around to take care of things in the immediate aftermath. And then he, of course, continued to put out the Times and Seasons. And even though John Taylor was editor, obviously he was near death. He didn't run the Times and Seasons. And so Phelps, of course, continued. And he wrote all of the story of the martyrdom and reported it all in. In fact, he used the word martyrdom. And then he wrote this poem, which he called Joseph Smith, which is praise to the man who communed with Jehovah, which we sing. But he wrote that immediately and put it in the Times and Seasons.
And so Willard Richards was also there at the jail at the time, right? He was the only one that basically came uninjured.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
And it was his account that Phelps put together in words in the Times and Seasons.
Okay.
And then when the 12 got back, Brigham Young immediately went to work to hold this meeting on August 8th, in which he talked about the keys that he and the 12 had. And Sidney Rigdon wanted Phelps to testify in his behalf, but he didn't. He said, no, I know all about this. I know who got the keys and when. I know all about it. And he testified that Brigham Young had the keys and Sidney Rigdon did not. And it helped swing it over to the 12 apostles for most of the membership of the church in Nauvoo, who sustained the 12 as the leadership of the church. That wasn't the end of the succession crisis. James Strang came into it, and William Smith, and a whole host of other people got involved in the succession crisis thereafter. But the majority of the Latter-day Saints in Nauvoo then stuck with the 12 at that point. And they even then held a trial, a public one, very public, in Nauvoo for Sidney Rigdon to excommunicate him. And the major testifier who knew all of the story was Phelps, who stood up in that meeting and said why Sidney Rigdon was in error. And then Rigdon was excommunicated in September of 1844, and he left and created his own organization. And then so the 12 apostles used Phelps all the way through, and when the Council of 50 was reconstituted by Brigham Young, Phelps became a big player there. And continued to put out the newspaper, not only the Times and Seasons, but the Nauvoo Neighbor as well. He wrote lots of things in that. And then when the Saints were on their way west in winter quarters, Phelps was assigned to go get a press because they needed a new press. And he went and got it in Boston, and that was the press that was used for all of the publications in Salt Lake, including the Deseret News and the Deseret Almanac. And Phelps single-handedly put out the Almanac for 15 years in Salt Lake on an annual basis, the Deseret Almanac.
So that Deseret Almanac was kind of based on something Thomas Jefferson had done?
Well, almanacs had been started in Britain, actually, but Benjamin Franklin had started almanacs in America prior to the Revolution, even.
Right.
And almanacs were the weather information and the information about the stars and the seasons and the dates and the times and the sun rising and sun setting. Almanacs did all of that, but they also put out pithy statements, and Phelps put out these and lots of doctrine, and he told about who the leaders of the church were, listed their names and their birth dates and all that kind of thing. And he had been assigned to put together an almanac back in 1832. In 1832, he was assigned by Joseph Smith to publish an almanac. They never got to it, but then he finally was able to get to it in Salt Lake City in 1851. And from 1851 to 1865, he published the almanac on an annual basis.
Which was very useful for farmers and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And he became the official weatherman in the territory of Utah also.
Well, he was a judge too, in fact.
And a justice of the peace. And ever since Nauvoo, he had been given the title Judge Phelps. So they refer to him as Judge Phelps. He was seated in General Conference on the stand as an honorary leader and figure, even though he wasn't of the 12 or the First Presidency. And they used him a lot. I feel that Brigham Young owed him a lot for helping sustain him and the 12 in 1844.
So they didn't really have the quorum of 70 as we have it now. Would he have been kind of a 70?
They had 70, but and they started putting the 7 presidents of 70 on the stand, and gradually they came to be known as general authorities. By the 1860s and 70s, the 7 presidents of 70, and there were several quorums scattered throughout the territory, but the 7 presidents of 70 were general authorities. In my lifetime, 50s, 60s, they were called the First Council of 70, the 7 presidents. By that time, that's what they were called. And they were general authorities and spoke in General Conference. And then in 1974, Spencer W. Kimball, president of the church, created the first quorum of 70s. And he called just a few isolated guys. And he reconstituted the 7 presidents, different people than had been. In some cases, some of them were the same, some of them weren't. And made them the 7 presidents of 70 again, and then the first quorum of 70 had 4 or 5 new ones, and then gradually got more and more and more, until we now have 50 general authority 70s.
Well, they used to have assistants to the 12.
Yes, and some of the assistants to the 12, he got rid of the assistants to the 12.
Kimball did.
And made some of them 70s, and even 7 presidents of 70.
Yeah. Because that was my understanding, was there were these assistants to the 12. I think
they started in the
Gordon B.
1940s.
Hinckley was one of those. Yeah.
To begin with, he was. You're right. But then he was called to the 12 himself in 1961.
Right.
Out of the assistants to the 12. But in 1974, the assistants to the 12 stopped, and some of them became 70s.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So would it be? I mean, it's a little bit anachronistic to call Phelps a 70, but functionally, was that kind of what he was?
Well, he was honorary leader, and he gave prayers and he was part of the legislature for a long time, which was a church-state operation in Utah Territory. Governor Brigham Young.
Theocracy.
It was a theocracy, and each member of the legislature was handpicked to be in the legislature, and it was a one-party system.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, can you talk a little bit about the end of his life? And
well, he continued to put out the almanac under Willard Richards, who was the nominal editor of the Deseret News until Willard Richards died in 1854. Phelps was the acting editor of the Deseret News, And then by and by, Albert Carrington became the editor of the Deseret News, and he kind of pushed Phelps out. He didn't like Phelps. Phelps didn't like Carrington. I read about it in the book. So he had less to do with the Deseret News, but he continued to put out the Deseret Almanac. And he got older and older. He believed that Joseph Smith said that he would live to see the second coming of Christ. And so he said he would never taste of death. He said that. He went around telling people, I will never taste of death. Except he was getting older. His dementia became obvious after 1865 when he stopped putting out the almanac. He just was incapable. He stopped being the weatherman. His son took over the weatherman's job. He fell into deep dementia, obviously, by 1868. He died in 1872. And some of his peers said, well, he didn't taste of death because he didn't even know what he was doing. And when he died, he didn't really taste of it because he didn't know what he was in dementia. So he ended his life in that state of affairs at age 80 in 1872.
It's tough to see somebody so successful succumb to dementia.
And the thing is, he had helped put together the official history of the church. They called it the history of Joseph Smith, actually. But that lay dormant after it was published in both the Times and Seasons and later the Deseret News, until B.H. Roberts edited it and put it out in published form in the 1910s, 19-teens. And then it became the official history of the church. And Phelps is in there, but most people never took a look at the 7-volume set of B.H. Roberts. I had a chance to do so in my studies, but most people didn't. And so Phelps kind of fell into oblivion. And when people put together histories, his name comes up, but not in his prominent role in all the things that he did. And so the purpose of this book was to show how deeply involved he was. The papers, the Joseph Smith papers does show it. I mean, it's obvious there,
right,
as you see the interchange.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, is there anything we've missed on W.W. Phelps that we need to bring up?
Well, he was certainly a big hymnist, and my last chapter actually goes into explaining his role in the hymns and how important that was, and his legacy. He was very much a temple man. With the House of the Lord in Kirtland, yes, and the dedication there, and for the 6 hymns that were sung in that dedication were his. Mm-hmm. And then when the Nauvoo temple was completed by the 12, Brigham Young, then they administered the endowment, which he had been a recipient of too, along with his wife Sally Phelps. He had been recipients of that. They're part of the Quorum of the Anointed. And then the endowment was officially administered in the Nauvoo temple, and he played the role of Satan, Lucifer, or the serpent in that endowment ceremony. And then when the endowment ceremony was reconstituted in the First Presidency's office, in the social hall, and then in the endowment house on a regular basis, Phelps played the role of the serpent or the devil in that, and got to be quite famous for his acting ability playing the role of the devil in the endowment ceremony.
Didn't he crawl around on the floor like a serpent?
In costume, full costume.
That would have been interesting to watch. I just did remember one other thing. We forgot to mention his third excommunication, which lasted just a day, I believe.
Not long. I had mentioned that he was assigned by Brigham Young on the 12th to go get that printing press. Uh-huh. He had been initiated into the endowment, obviously, in Nauvoo, and had been sealed to 2 other women in plural marriage in Nauvoo. However, they didn't come with him when they left. Sally's first wife. They had 2 others, but those other 2 didn't stay with the church even. They kind of fell into oblivion. We can track them a little bit, but they didn't come west. Well, he obviously felt that he should get more plural wives, and when he was in Boston, he picked up 3 young women, and he had Henry Jacobs, who was returning from his mission to Britain, perform the ordinance of sealing him to these 3 women. He said, you can do it. You have the authority. I say you can do it. Do it. You seal me to these 3. And then he took these 3 back with him to winter quarters and even cohabited with them in full marriage detail. And And when they arrived in winter quarters, Brigham Young had just arrived back from going to Salt Lake for the first time with the other members of the 12. They arrived about the same time, and Brigham Young saw, what is this? What did you do? You have no right to take plural wives. I only give permission to do that. And they discussed it, and they wanted to make sure that that doctrine was completely clear. Brigham Young only authorized that. And so they decided...
So you had to go through Brigham before you could contract with anybody else.
And so to set that example and to set that record straight, they excommunicated W. Phelps for doing unauthorized polygamy, and then rebaptized him 2 days later.
So, that's so funny to me that was such a short time.
And of those three, one of them ended up being officially sealed to him as an official plural wife, and stayed with him and mothered 3 babies that he fathered. She became his official second wife. He ended up having a couple of others that didn't work out too well. But the only other children he fathered was through this Sarah, who was one of the Boston girls, and ended up officially being sealed to him.
What happened to the other 2?
I have no idea.
No idea. So he only ended up with 2.
Well, he had a couple more, but that didn't work out too well.
Oh.
In Salt Lake.
So, all right. Well, Dr. Bruce Van Orden, anything else you want to share with us? Or?
Well, I do like Phelps. I felt like I was going with him on the watercraft as he went on the Ohio River and the Missouri River and the Mississippi River, and as he crossed by horseback and as he walked, and I could smell his ink in the printing office, and I felt I was living with him in his environment. I pretended I was living in their time and place, and I tried to put them in their time and place. I like him. I love his hymns. I sing them fervently, but I also recognize his flaws, and I feel that the biography is a fair representation of him, warts and all. Yeah,
definitely, yeah. So, were you there probably, I think it's been about 10 years, in Independence there was for Mormon History Association on the Sunday, they had a devotional in the Community of Christ Temple, and all of the hymns were done by W. Phelps.
I've been to 2 of those John Whitmer Society things, in Independence, one of them, and in Nauvoo also, but also in Kirtland, where we went into the house of the Lord and sang those hymns there. Yes, so I've done it 3 times with that.
Yeah, that was really fun, especially to hear. I remember one of them, I can't remember which song it was, but they did the LDS song version for verse 1, and then they did the
It's the Spirit of God. They do it somewhat differently.
Yeah. Yeah, the tune was a little bit different, but it was
slightly
fun.
different, not major.
Right. Yeah, it was a fun thing.
It is fun.
All right. Well, I want to thank you again for sitting down with me and spending so much time here on Gospel Tangents. And if you guys don't have his book, you should get it. It's a fantastic book. Like I said, it's not just the biography of Phelps, but you just catch so much church history in that. So he was definitely a major player in a lot of big, important events. So
thank you.
Thanks again. Appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Bruce Van Orden. Bruce is the author of We'll Sing and We'll Shout, The Life and Times of W. Phelps. If you don't have this book, you need to get it. It's a fantastic book. It's not only the life of W. Phelps, but it's pretty much all of the Missouri period and more. So it's a fantastic book. You definitely want to get it. In our next episode, I'm excited to introduce Devin Jensen. He's the president of the LDS Publishing and Media Association. So we'll learn more about that. They've got an upcoming conference, and I'm going to give you a couple of secret codes that'll get you a discount on the meeting right here coming up in just a few days.
And then we have our annual conference. That's kind of our big event that we do. That'll be October 7th through 9th this year at the BYU Conference Center. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to have both a gathering in person and a virtual portion. Some people are away from the Wasatch Front, and so it may be difficult for them to gather, or for health reasons they may not want to gather.
Are you going to record it, or can people watch it after the fact?
Yes, we will record it, and it will be available for about a month and a half, till November 21st, I believe, is the date that people can watch it. So,
okay.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of a window. I'll also give you 2 codes. If you're a student 2021 will work. And if you're a friend of LDS-PMA, it's friend 2021. And those will give you some money off the normal registration fee. Again, we're free to join the organization, and hopefully we'll find some value there.
The conference costs a little bit of money.
The conference does cost a little bit of money, so I want to make that clear. But a way to sign up and learn some stuff, hone your craft.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe for just $5 a month at patreon.com/gospeltangents, and you can hear the entire interview before everybody else. If you'd like to watch the entire video for just $8 a month, you can either subscribe on YouTube, Patreon, or my website, gospeltangents.com. Just click the yellow subscribe button, and I'll add you to our Gospel Tangents Insiders group so that you can see entire videos. For those interested in a PDF transcript, you can subscribe at either Patreon or on my website. For just $10 a month, I'll send you a PDF as soon as it's complete. If you'd like a copy of the paperback as well as a PDF, just sign up for $20 a month at either Patreon or my website, gospeltangents.com. Of course, you can buy individual transcripts at amazon.com and just do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see all the things that we have there. Don't forget to support Gospel Tangents with an awesome t-shirt like one of these. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. Get our latest updates at facebook.com/gospeltangents. Also, you can get our Twitter updates at Gospel Tangents. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got more of our great videos. Thanks again.